It's a great pleasure to be here. I especially want to thank Rob Johnson for all the work that he's done to arrange this and for everything that he's doing to INET. So thank you, Rob. And of course, we want to thank George Soros for his generosity. So let me talk. I'm going to talk about whether the efficient markets hypothesis led to the crisis. That is the topic of this session. So I was asked that question. I guess I'm supposed to give an answer to it. I believe that one could say possibly that, yeah, the efficient markets hypothesis has led to this crisis. But I think one could say this just as one could say that, let's say that World War I has many different causes depending on your level of analysis. So depending on your level of analysis, you might think that World War I is caused by the death of Archduke Ferdinand or whoever. Or you might think that it was due to the war plans of the generals, or you might think that it was due to geopolitical place of Germany and Europe, et cetera, et cetera. So let me now make the case for why the efficient markets hypothesis might have caused the crisis. In the old days for me means something like the 1980s, even the leading investment banks had relatively little capital. And then what happened was new and altered financial institutions found that they could make large profits from clever speculations. Those clever speculations were all the more profitable because they could be hedged by new securities such as credit default swaps. A view of the efficient markets hypothesis is the following. It is that insofar as asset values depart from fundamental values, they'll regress toward the mean. That seems to me the basis for a very large number of market speculations. So, for example, this was the basic idea underlying long-term capital management. So coupled with this idea, many of the strategies were hedged. For example, one might take two assets whose values were well correlated, where one of the two assets had gotten out of line, more out of line than the other with fundamental values, and then the hedged asset would be bought to buy one asset short and the other asset to sell. With such well-hedged strategies, profits could be obtained, but in order to make significant profits, a very large amount of leverage was typically needed. So positions were taken that were not just leveraged, they were massively leveraged. That meant that those who were engaged in such speculation had to take on large amounts of debt in order to do business. But then when they were in error, their leverage position meant that they exposed those who had loaned them the money to massive default risk. And such default endangered a whole long line of dominoes. So these strategies worked well in normal times, but they were not robust to model error. Especially they were not robust to model error where many people were using the same erroneous models. So when the model failed to describe reality, when efficient markets hypothesis failed to describe reality, for example, when values were diverging away from fundamentals rather than converging toward them, the financial system was exposed to massive bankruptcy. So I should say that I have respect for the view that the efficient markets view played a major role in the crisis. But then I think there are also other equally valid stories about how the crisis occurred. You know, it's like World War I. I think there are many ways in which one can look at the crisis and many different explanations, and all of which are correct. You're just looking at things from different points of view. Bob Schiller and I have told one such point of view, which is the animal spirits story. So we've written this book called Animal Spirits. And actually, the story I like best in this book is not the one that was written by us. It's the one that's on the cover. Okay, so what is the cover? We asked a good cartoonist, Ed Koren, to design a cover for us. And he's the person who does these fuzzy animals that are in the New Yorker. And so he did some fuzzy animals. We wanted the fuzzy animals for animal spirits. But actually, he did more than that. He actually read the book. And then he's a great cartoonist, I think. He captured the spirit of the book. And I think he not only captured it, he captured it better perhaps than the 200 pages we wrote. So what he did was, he has these animals, and he has this line here. I know you can't see it, but he has this line, this bar, and that bar, of course, represents markets and so forth. It's this type of thing economists look at, not the type of thing cartoonists look at. And so you have this animal here, and it's the top of the market, and he has his hands up like that, everything's great, and that's the way he is. Then the market begins to slip, and you have this guy, and his eyes are simply bugging out, this guy in yellow. And then you have the guy in green, and the market's here at the bottom, and he's hanging on for dear life. And then so it goes. The guy's up here, the market's going up again like it has now, and this guy is bugging out his eyes again, and so forth. So that, I think, is the spirit of capitalism. That's the spirit of capitalism, and I think it's a spirit of capitalism which is not necessarily captured by efficient markets hypothesis. So Bob and I, we have the animal spirit story, and I'm going to tell you more in detail than the Corin cartoon about what that is. So especially, we've said that 3 animal spirits played a key role in the crisis, and they are confidence, snake oil, and stories. And I'm going to discuss the 3 of them in turn and then tell how they caused the crisis. And then I'm going to make a note about regulation. So, confidence. Economists have an interpretation of the meaning of term confidence. So one interpretation is that it's just a prediction. It's just a prediction of what's going to happen. A confident prediction projects the future to be rosy. An unconfident prediction projects the future as bleak. But actually, if you look up confidence in the dictionary, you see that it's more than a prediction, because this is what the dictionary says. The dictionary says that it means trust or full belief. So the English word comes from the Latin fido, I trust. In that case, the prediction point of view misses something, and it misses something important. It only partly captures what's meant by trust or belief. The prediction view suggests that confidence is rational, that people use the information at hand to make rational predictions. They then make rational decisions based on those rational predictions. Now, surely that's correct some of the time. People often do make many predictions that are confidently in that way. But then you think about it and you think that there's more to confidence than that. The very meaning of trust is that we go beyond the rational. The truly trusting person throws away some information. She may not process her information rationally, on the one hand, and then furthermore, even if she has processed her information rationally, she may not operate on it rationally. She acts according to what she trusts to be true. So if this is what we mean by confidence, then we see immediately why, if it varies over time, it plays a major role in the business cycle. Why? Because there are good times when people trust and people make decisions spontaneously. They know instinctively that they will be successful. They suspend their suspicion, and while everybody is doing this, you know what happens. Asset values are going to be high, and as long as they're trusting, this impulsiveness is not discovered. But then when the confidence disappears, the bad decisions are revealed. But then confidence cannot be restored. Its disappearance is irreversible. So confidence then goes beyond. It goes beyond a rational approach to decision-making, and from its meaning, it's automatic. It's automatic why it should play a major role in macroeconomics. Okay, so now let's go to the next thing, which is snake oil. So the next factor in determining the cycle is snake oil. Now, there's a trivial point whose importance for economics has not been appropriately appreciated. So we economists say that free markets produce what people want as long as firms can make a profit. That's called Pareto optimality. But we forget about the production of snake oil. The more basic principle here is that the capitalism system does not just produce what people want as long as people can make a profit. Instead, it does the following. Rather, more generally, capitalism produces what people think they want as long as firms can make a profit. It produces, I don't know if you can see that in red, it says that they produce what people think they want as long as firms can make a profit. Let me give you an example. So our book's full of examples, and I'm going to give you some examples. For example, unregulated capitalism may produce good medicines that cure our ills, and I think that it does. But unregulated capitalism also produces snake oil that does not cure our ills. It may even find it profitable to produce the desire for the snake oil itself. In fact, that's one major reason for the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. What does the Food and Drug Administration do? It protects us against buying snake oil medicine. So let me give you a story. There's a story you probably all know. The Rockefellers, father and son, give an illustration of my point. So William Rockefeller was the father of John D., the first, and in the 19th century, William would tour the United States Midwest, and he would tour in his buggy. And when he reached a new town square, what he would do is when he reached a new town, he would go to the town square. He would give a talk, and he would distribute flyers. And that flyers would say that Dr. Rockefeller was in town, and Dr. Rockefeller had the miraculous cure for people's ills. He would then go to the fanciest hotel suite in town, and he would sell his wares. He would sell his wares to those who came to get their ills cured. In contrast, the contrast between William Rockefeller and his son is apt. So William was selling snake oil, and he represented one side of capitalism. In contrast, John D. sold real oil, and that oil really did light people's lamps, and it really did fuel their cars, and that represents the productive side of capitalism. So the principle of snake oil has special relevance to asset markets. Assets to most people are only pieces of paper. They may only be things in cyberspace, for all I know now. Now, most investors surmise the value of financial assets from what others, such as accountants and rating agencies, tell about them. These accounting and rating agencies also have their own incentives. And those incentives are not fully aligned with the public's interest. And so when people are overconfident, financial markets tend to produce assets that take advantage of that overconfidence. If unprotected by effective regulation, people will be sold snake oil assets. And furthermore, an industry will arise to produce them. And that's what we've seen in Wall Street and beyond. That's what we've just seen. You should see this industry that arises as just natural. That's what competitive capitalism is going to produce. As long as you can produce something that you can sell at a profit, that's what standard competitive theory says is going to happen. Okay? Okay, so that takes us to the third of our animal spirits. This takes us to stories. Okay? So think about stories. We're all motivated by stories, and they affect much of what we do. So for example, think about your being here in this room. Everybody in this room has a little story that you have to tell about why you're here and what you're doing here. That's your motivation. It comes from your story. Think about a marriage, for example, for those of you who are married especially. So the wonderful thing about a great marriage is that in a great marriage, it isn't just what's happening day by day, it is all those stories. Actually, it's wonderful to come back here to Cambridge for two reasons. One is because I was here a long time ago in 1970, And so it reminds me of this. And it's, I'm telling this story to myself. But more than that, when I was first married to Janet Yellen, we came here to England. And I spent 2 wonderful years here in England. And so coming back here to England and to Cambridge reminds me of those stories. And so Janet's not with me, but I'm thinking of those good days. So it's these stories, and these stories really are what motivate us and get us to do a lot of the things we do. Now, people are not indifferent to stories, and they are part of what motivates us. And most business cycles are associated with stories. Indeed, these stories often are the underlying source of people's confidence. So let me give you an example, and an example is the dot-com boom of the 1990s. Now, remarkably, to tell you another story, a firm believer in the efficient markets theory confidently told me, he knew this, I don't know how he knew it. He told me in December of 2001 that the rise in stock prices in the 1990s had been fully rational. This is what he said. He said the people were just acting on their views regarding the future returns from a new technology. Now, I had a different opinion, and I still do. My opinion was that a New Yorker cartoonist had gotten it right. What had the cartoonist done? He showed a prosperous gentleman in his living room, presumably in Westchester, while the maid was dusting. And what does the prosperous gentleman ask her? He says, Rosie, he says, what dot-com stock should I buy? Okay? Well, when you see those cartoons in the New Yorker, you should sell your stocks. Okay? If you go back to every big boom, there is always a story, and the last boom was no exception. Okay, so how did the crash occur? Okay, so we can now fit together these 3 animal spirits and explain how the crash occurred. It was massive overconfidence. The Madoff scandal and subprime mortgages are indications of people's lack of skepticism about where they park their money. Indeed, such over-optimism was a general phenomenon in financial markets where people bought complex assets that could not be easily rated. They failed to understand the risks involved. During the boom, while the confidence held, the stories went around that risks were minimal. Like those who flocked to William Rockefeller, people were buying snake oil. They were buying snake oil assets. So then, when the snake oil soured, the stories changed, and we believe this was the basic mechanism in the current boom and bust, as with most of the major peacetime booms and busts before it. Okay, so now I'm going to describe 7 features of the financial structure. As I see it, the major role in the boom and bust came from 7 features of the new financial structure. 1, there was the rise of the shadow banking system, which was fragile because it borrowed short but invested long. 2, there was the initiation of loans by those who did not keep them, but instead passed them on to others. In the image of Larry Kotlikoff, Jimmy Stewart was dead. 3, there was the advent of new financial instruments such as derivatives in many forms that gave a false promise of alleviating risk. 4, there was the use of financial models based on the efficient markets hypothesis, but that gave an incomplete analysis of how financial markets really operate. 5, the rating agencies failed in their job. They were also given deniability by the use of mathematical models which were incomplete, one might even say false. 6, there were massive bonuses for current profits regardless of risk, and that gave the wrong incentives. And 7, there was total lack of regulation of the new areas of the economy. And I'm going to repeat that. There was total lack of regulation of the new areas of the economy. So that takes me to my final point, which is the playpen problem. So let me describe for you the playpen problem. Okay? So the playpen problem comes from the life of toddlers. Okay? And this is something that's known by every parent here. If you put your toddler in the playpen, you do not have to watch over them very much. But if you let your toddler out of the playpen, you need to watch what she does. Now, the same is true of financial markets. Suppose you deregulate financial markets on the one hand. For example, just for example, suppose you allow derivatives that you did not allow before. Then you need additional regulation to see that the markets do not get out of control. So if you let your child out of the playpen, that is, if you give her the freedom to wander about the house, then you need to watch her. The rhetoric that we hear about deregulation always misses this point. It's always a little bit funny to listen to. It says we either need more or less deregulation. Now, the view that deregulation should go in only one direction fails to appreciate the soft snake oil underbelly of capitalism. If you allow markets more freedom in one direction, you also need to regulate them more in another. And that is one of the major factors that results in manias and panics. Well, I think we see it. It's true that capitalism does work. Think of our standard of living here and also in other Western countries. But unfortunately, capitalism sometimes works all too well, and then it also has to be curbed. So we failed to understand this message, and we now need urgently to reestablish a financial regulatory system that works. Okay, so thank you very much.